She walked in cold and powerful, but one spoonful of his soup cracked her armor. Want to know how? Stay tuned and make sure you subscribe. Leo Hartman's life had been rebuilt in the shadow of loss. Once he was a young chef chasing grand ambitions, believing that one day his white jacket and steady hands would open the doors to shining restaurants and glowing reviews. But fate had carved another path for him. On the night his daughter Rosie was born, he lost Julia, the woman he loved, the heart of his dreams. What should have been the happiest moment of his life became the most devastating. From that day forward, his world shrank to a single purpose: raising his little girl. He abandoned the glittering kitchens, the long shifts, and the applause he had once sought. Instead, he poured himself into a modest diner with scratched tables and a tired stove, a place where he could keep going, not for himself, but for her. Rosie was only 3, but she was his anchor. With wide, curious eyes and a smile that melted through even his darkest nights, she gave him reason to breathe. Leo worked morning to midnight, always with her close by. Sometimes perched on a counter with her stuffed rabbit, sometimes tugging at his apron strings. When she cried, he soothed her with lullabies. When she laughed, he laughed harder. The absence of Julia lingered like a ghost in the corners of their lives, but Rosie's small hands reaching for him made that emptiness just a little easier to bear. She couldn't erase the grief, but she filled the hollow space with something new, something worth living for. The restaurant itself was far from glamorous. A few wobbly tables, a chalkboard menu smudged with fingerprints, and a kitchen that smelled of garlic no matter how many times he scrubbed it. Yet Leo treated it like a sanctuary. He hummed while stirring soups, letting the steam curl around him like an old memory. Rosie would sit nearby, swinging her legs and asking questions about carrots, onions, and spices, and he would answer with a patience he never knew he had. Every dish carried more than flavor. It carried his promise that she would never feel abandoned, that even in a life carved by tragedy, warmth could still be found in a bowl of soup. At night, when Rosie was asleep in the tiny apartment above the diner, Leo often found himself sitting alone in the kitchen. The clatter of the city outside was faint, and the steady bubbling of a pot was his only company. He would look at his rough hands and think of Julia, whispering apologies into the empty air. "I'm trying. I'm doing my best." The grief never truly left, but when morning came and Rosie toddled in with her hair messy and her rabbit in hand, Leo knew he had survived another day. He had lost the woman he loved, but he still had a reason to keep standing. Rosie wasn't just his daughter. She was his chance at redemption, the proof that even the deepest scars could give way to something beautiful. Evelyn Krauss had built her empire brick by brick, deal by deal, with a heart as cold as the glass towers she owned. To the world, she was a model of control. Sharp suits, sharper words, and a reputation for turning everything she touched into profit. She walked through life as though it were a boardroom, calculating, dismissive, untouchable. But the truth was simpler. She had long ago decided that vulnerability was weakness. Feelings didn't sign contracts, and compassion didn't secure land rights. That morning, she traveled into a district she would never normally set foot in, not out of curiosity, but out of necessity. She had her eyes on a parcel of land, a small, stubborn corner that refused to sell. Her assistants begged her to delegate, but Evelyn rarely trusted anyone to close the deal the way she could. She disliked the streets the moment her heels touched the ground: narrow, uneven sidewalks, dust on the air, the faint hum of machines where roadwork blocked half the block. Everything about it irritated her. She muttered under her breath, promising herself she would finish quickly and never come back. She was halfway across the construction zone when it happened. A truck rattled by, its tires chewing through wet mud, and before Evelyn could react, the entire side of her immaculate navy coat was splattered. She froze, stunned, as cold brown streaks dripped down her sleeves. A sharp gasp left her throat, followed by fury. She looked down at the mess, her suit, her shoes, her bag ruined. The workers kept moving, shouting to one another over the din of engines, barely noticing her. Evelyn clenched her jaw, every nerve in her body screaming for order in a place that had none. Her assistant reached for tissues, but it was hopeless. She needed water, soap, space to breathe. With her temper burning hotter than the midday sun, she spotted a small diner at the corner and made her way inside, muttering curses under her breath. To anyone else it was just a stop, but to Evelyn, it felt like defeat reduced to scrubbing mud in the restroom of a place she would normally pass without a glance. The diner was almost empty when she entered. She caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror, hair still perfect but her suit ruined, and for a moment she let herself unravel. "Unbelievable," she hissed, dabbing at the stains. "Billions in assets and I'm here cleaning mud like a fool." She pressed harder, frustrated at how fragile her control felt outside the glass walls of her empire. That's when she heard it, a sound faint but distinct, coming from beyond the restroom door. A voice. Not loud, not theatrical, just a man humming. The tone was soft, almost careless, yet it carried something strangely grounding. Evelyn paused, frowning. She was not a woman easily distracted, but the tune pulled at her. She left the restroom and stepped into the quiet dining room. The diner was plain wooden tables, chalkboard menus, but her eyes found him immediately. A man at the counter, sleeves rolled, packing food into containers with practiced hands. His face was focused yet calm, his movements steady. When he finished, he gathered the packages and disappeared through the front door. Evelyn blinked, unsettled by how ordinary yet unshakably peaceful he seemed. She sat down at one of the tables, picking up a menu left behind, pretending to read though her mind was elsewhere. That was when she heard it, the sharp, desperate cry of a child. Evelyn turned, startled, just as a little girl stumbled from the kitchen. Tears streaked her flushed cheeks, her small fists rubbing her eyes. The sound was piercing, raw, not the polite whimpering of children she occasionally saw at charity galas, but something heavier, needier. Evelyn stiffened. She had no experience with children, none. For a moment she froze, caught between irritation and confusion. "Where are your parents?" she asked sharply, but the girl didn't answer. She only wailed louder, clutching a stuffed rabbit that dragged across the floor. Evelyn took half a step back, utterly unsure what to do. Then the man returned. He entered quietly, almost instinctively, scooping the child into his arms, without a single word to Evelyn. His face softened instantly, his voice lowering to a whisper only the girl seemed to hear. He reached for a pot on the stove, filled a spoon, and brought it gently to her lips. "Your favorite Rosie?" he murmured. "Just a little." The girl's sobs slowed, her hiccups softened, and within moments she was calm, nestled against his shoulder. Evelyn stared, stunned by the transformation. A moment ago, chaos. Now, serenity. She found her voice again, sharper than intended. "You can't just leave a child like that. It's irresponsible." The man looked at her calmly, without defensiveness, without apology, only a quiet strength. He gave a faint smile, kissed his daughter's hair, and said nothing more. In that silence, Evelyn felt something unfamiliar ripple through her, something she couldn't name but couldn't dismiss. Evelyn remained seated at the corner table longer than she intended, the echo of the child's cries still hanging in the air. She hadn't come here to linger. This diner was a detour, an inconvenience, a blemish on a day that was supposed to be efficient and controlled. And yet she found herself watching the man, this quiet, rough-handed chef who seemed more like a guardian than a cook. He moved with a strange kind of grace, setting his daughter down on a chair, smoothing her curls back with a tenderness Evelyn had rarely seen in anyone, let alone in men she dealt with. For a woman who lived in boardrooms where voices were sharp and hands were weapons, the sight felt almost disarming. She opened the menu just to distract herself, but the smudged chalk letters meant nothing. What caught her instead was the smell. Something warm drifted from the kitchen, earthy and sweet, like carrots simmering slowly, garlic softening in oil. It wrapped around her before she could resist, coaxing a memory from somewhere she thought long buried. She had been small once, 2 knees on a cold kitchen floor, her mother humming while a pot of soup bubbled away. She pushed the thought aside before it could take root, straightened her back and cleared her throat. When the man finally returned to the counter, his daughter now calm and nibbling on a crust of bread, Evelyn surprised herself. "I'll try the soup," she said, her tone more clipped than she intended. He glanced at her, not with the deference she was used to, but with simple acknowledgement. and gave a short nod. A few minutes later, a steaming bowl appeared in front of her, plain and unadorned, served with nothing but a wooden spoon. She picked it up cautiously, as if unsure whether this humble dish deserved her attention, then tasted. The first sip stopped her. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't layered with the kind of flavors she was used to in fine dining, but it was real. Carrot, potato, thyme. Simple. Honest. The warmth spread through her chest in a way no luxury ever had. She blinked quickly, annoyed at the sting in her eyes. "It tastes like," she began, then cut herself off. The words felt too personal. She swallowed and set the spoon down, composing her face. "It's good," she said instead, voice flat, though something in her eyes betrayed more. The chef gave the faintest smile, the kind you almost missed if you weren't looking. "Glad you like it," he said quietly, then turned back to his daughter. Rosie's small hand reached for the spoon, and he fed her another bite without breaking stride. Evelyn watched the ease of it, the way the child leaned into him, the way his entire focus shifted to her, as if the rest of the world disappeared. Something stirred in Evelyn's chest, envy maybe, or longing, though she would never admit it. To fill the silence, she spoke. "You're a good father," she said, almost reluctantly. He glanced at her, surprised, then shrugged. "I'm just doing my best." His voice was steady, humble, without the false modesty she so often encountered. She studied him, the frayed edges of his jacket, the tired creases in his face, the way his scarred hands moved with careful gentleness. There was nothing polished about him, nothing she could categorize, and that unsettled her more than she cared to admit. They spoke little after that, but the quiet itself seemed to say more than words. She asked where his wife was, and he hesitated before answering, "Gone." The word hung heavy in the space between them. She didn't press. He mentioned the struggles of running the diner, of long nights and bills piling high, but his eyes always softened when he glanced at Rosie. "As long as she's okay," he murmured, "I'll keep going." Evelyn felt a tightness in her chest, though she disguised it with a sip of water. She lived in a world where success was measured in contracts signed and buildings owned, but sitting there, watching this man with his child and a simple bowl of soup, she felt the unfamiliar sting of something else. Not pity, respect. And beneath it, a quiet ache. She excused herself soon after, telling herself she had work waiting, deals to secure, but when she stepped back out into the noise of the street, the memory of that soup clung to her like perfume. That night, for the first time in years, Evelyn Krauss lay awake in her immaculate bed, staring at the ceiling, and found herself haunted not by numbers or strategy, but by the warmth of a humble spoonful of soup and the echo of a child's laugh she hadn't earned. Evelyn's penthouse was as flawless as she was. Glass, steel, carefully curated art, everything in its right place. Yet that night, none of it could quiet her mind. She lay beneath Egyptian cotton sheets, her hair loose across the pillow, eyes open to the dark. Normally, sleep came quickly. Her routines, her discipline, her sheer exhaustion from work guaranteed it. But now she turned from side to side, replaying the same images until they blurred together. A child's tear-stained face, the soft hum of a lullaby, the steam curling from a plain wooden spoon. She could still taste the soup, though it was nothing extraordinary by her usual standards, and yet the flavor lingered, stubborn, unsettling. It wasn't the ingredients she remembered, it was the way it felt. It had been warm, grounding, almost protective. It reminded her of something she had buried long ago, her mother's kitchen, her mother's laughter, a bowl placed in her small hands after a long cry. The memory was so sharp she sat upright, breath unsteady. She had built walls for decades, and in a single afternoon a stranger and his child had cracked them. She poured herself a glass of water and walked to the wide window that overlooked the city. Towers blinked with endless lights. Streets buzzed below like veins carrying lifeblood through the night. It was her kingdom, her empire. Yet tonight, it all felt strangely hollow. She whispered into the glass reflection, as if testing the sound of her own voice. "What am I missing?" The words felt foreign. Vulnerability was not a language she spoke. And yet she couldn't deny the hollow ache that the memory of that diner stirred in her. She pressed her forehead to the cool pain and closed her eyes. For years she had convinced herself she didn't need anyone. She had silenced the voice that sometimes asked what it might feel like to belong, to be cared for without condition. But tonight, the silence was too loud. It wasn't money, it wasn't power, it was something else, something she couldn't buy. By dawn, she had made a decision, the way she always did, swiftly, firmly, with action. Evelyn Krause never sat idle when a thought unsettled her. She called her legal team, instructed her assistant to prepare documents, and set her driver on standby. If she couldn't rid herself of the restlessness this man and his little girl had caused, then she would confront it. She told herself it was simple. The diner was failing, the man was struggling. She had the means to change that. She could invest, she could secure the property, she could fold it into something greater. It was practical, it was generous, it was controllable. At least, that's what she repeated to herself, as her car carried her back to the same streets she swore she'd never return to. The morning was gray, the ground damp, her heels clicking sharply as she stepped inside the diner once again. The place smelled of fresh bread this time, warm and homely, and that scent only deepened her resolve. Leo looked up from behind the counter when she entered, his daughter balanced on one hip, a dish towel slung over his shoulder. He didn't hide his surprise, though he quickly masked it with a cautious calm. Evelyn placed a folder on the nearest table, her voice as direct as ever. "I want to help," she said. "This place has potential. I can secure the deed, invest in upgrades, make sure you and your daughter never have to worry again." For a moment, silence hung in the air, broken only by Rosie's soft giggle as she tugged at her father's collar. Leo set her down gently, then turned to Evelyn. His expression was not gratitude. It was something harder, something immovable. "No," he said simply. Evelyn blinked, unused to hearing the word. "Excuse me?" His voice was steady. "My father built this place with his own hands. He taught me what it means to earn every corner of these walls. I'd rather struggle here on my own terms than sell it and work under someone else's name." Evelyn stiffened, heat rising in her chest. She had expected resistance, but not this kind of quiet defiance. She gathered her folder, ready to leave, but his next words stopped her cold. "Thank you for the offer, but you can't buy what you saw yesterday. That's not for sale." His eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. Evelyn's jaw tightened. She turned to go, but paused at the door, her back to him. Her words came quieter this time, almost fragile. "I wasn't trying to buy it, I just wanted to be part of it." Then she left, her heels sharp against the pavement, though her heart felt anything but steady. The day after Evelyn's proposal and Leo's refusal, the diners seemed to breathe in a different rhythm. Leo tried to carry on as if nothing had happened. He wiped counters, stirred soup, chopped vegetables with his usual precision, but there was a weight in his chest he couldn't shake. He hated conflict, hated raising his voice, but something about Evelyn's presence lingered. Her words, her posture, her sudden quietness at the door. It unsettled him. He told himself it didn't matter. People like her belonged in skyscrapers, not diners. People like her solved problems with signatures, not sweat. And yet, as Rosie hummed softly while coloring on a napkin at the corner table, Leo found himself remembering the way Evelyn had looked at his daughter the day before. Not with pity, not even with curiosity, something closer to longing. He shook it off and went back to work. The morning crowd was light, as always. A pair of construction workers came in for sandwiches, an elderly man for coffee, a young couple who left before ordering when they saw the limited menu. It was nothing unusual, at least not until the door opened just after noon. At first, Leo thought it was a mistake. A group of men and women in tailored suits stepped inside, their polished shoes clicking against the worn floor. They carried briefcases, their watches gleamed, and their voices dropped in confusion as they looked around the modest diner. Rosie stopped coloring and stared, her wide eyes blinking at the strangers who looked so out of place in this corner of the world. The leader of the group, a broad-shouldered man with silver hair, cleared his throat. "We'll all have the soup," he announced. His colleagues nodded, as though the decision had been made long before they entered. Leo froze with the ladle in his hand. "The soup?" he asked, uncertain. "Yes. All of us," the man confirmed. One by one they filled the tables, their expensive coats draped over chairs, their phones buzzing quietly on the scratched wooden surfaces. Leo set to work, his movements quick but careful, ladling soup into bowls, balancing trays on his arms. Rosie hopped off her chair and ran behind the counter, clutching her stuffed rabbit, sensing her father's unease. The scene felt almost absurd. The clatter of spoons and low hum of conversation filled the diner in a way Leo had never heard before. Suits hunched over steaming bowls, slurping quietly, murmuring approval. "Remarkable," one whispered. "Reminds me of home," another said softly. The silver-haired man leaned back, smiling. "Comfort food at its finest," he declared, and the others nodded in agreement. Leo, flushed from rushing between tables, finally leaned against the counter, trying to understand. Why here? Why now? The diner hadn't been this full in years. When the last bowl was nearly finished, Leo approached one of the women at the table. "If you don't mind me asking," he said carefully, "why did you all come here?" She looked at him with an amused smile. "Because someone told us we had to try your soup," Leo blinked. "Who?" Before she could answer, the door opened again and the room seemed to shift. Evelyn stepped inside, not in her usual steel armor of suits and sharp edges, but in a softer blouse, her hair tied back, her expression calm. She looked around the room, at the empty bowls, at the men and women praising the soup, then at Leo. A small smile touched her lips. "I may have mentioned you," she admitted. For a moment, Leo didn't know whether to laugh or scowl. He shook his head, wiping his hands on his apron. "So, this is your idea of investment? Filling my diner with people who eat lunch in boardrooms?" Evelyn chuckled lightly, a sound so foreign it startled even her. "It worked, didn't it? They loved it." She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "Sometimes all it takes is the right introduction." Rosie tugged on her father's sleeve, peeking shyly at Evelyn, then ducking behind him. Evelyn's eyes softened. She bent slightly, just enough to meet the little girl's gaze. "Don't worry," she said gently. "I'm not here to take anything away." Her words surprised even herself, the honesty in them cutting through her practiced walls. When the suited guests finally left, leaving generous tips and promises to return, the diner was quiet again. Leo leaned against the counter, exhaling heavily. Evelyn remained by the door, as if debating whether to go or stay. Finally, she stepped forward. "I told you yesterday I wasn't trying to buy my way in," she said softly. "I meant it." Leo glanced at her, his brow furrowed, his defenses still up. "In your world, money opens doors. In mine, it doesn't mean a thing if you're not willing to stay and scrub the floors too." For the first time in years, Evelyn laughed, not a polished social laugh, but a real one. "Then show me," she challenged. He raised an eyebrow. "Show you what?" She set her bag on the counter, rolled up her sleeves, and pointed toward the kitchen. "Where's the dish soap?" For a long moment, Leo just stared at her. Then, slowly, the corner of his mouth lifted. He handed her a towel and motioned toward the mountain of dirty plates. She followed him into the kitchen, her manicured hands awkward at first, but her determination real. They worked side by side, soap suds clinging to her wrists, laughter bubbling unexpectedly between them. Rosie wandered in, watching curiously, then giggled at the sight of the powerful stranger scrubbing dishes. For the first time in a long time, the diner felt alive, not just with customers but with something deeper, something almost like family. The afternoon sun slanted through the diner's front window, turning the worn wooden tables golden as Leo stacked the last of the clean dishes. His forearms glistened with water, his shirt damp at the sleeves, but he wore the quiet smile of someone who had survived another impossible day. Evelyn dried her hands on a towel, her movement still awkward, her fingers red from scrubbing, yet her expression oddly satisfied. For a woman who lived in a world where people jumped at her commands, standing elbow-deep in suds was almost laughable. And yet, she hadn't laughed that hard in years. Rosie sat cross-legged on the counter, nibbling on a piece of bread and watching them like an audience at a play, her big eyes darting back and forth. "She thinks we're funny," Leo murmured. Evelyn glanced at the little girl, then back at him, a flicker of warmth touching her face. Maybe she's right. For a moment, silence stretched between them, not heavy, but full, like a space that no longer needed filling. When the last plate was put away, Leo glanced at the clock and sighed. "Time to pick her up from school." Evelyn blinked, surprised. "She's already in school?" He nodded, reaching for his coat. "Just a small program, only a few hours a day, but it matters. She loves it." Rosie clapped her hands at the mention of school, bouncing with excitement. Evelyn hesitated, then asked, almost awkwardly, "Do you want help?" Leo raised an eyebrow. "Help with what?" "With picking her up," she said quickly, almost defensive. "I mean, it's on my way." It wasn't, not at all, but she pretended it was. He studied her for a moment, then gave a half smile. "Fine, but don't expect her to hold your hand. She's picky about those things." Evelyn smirked, lifting her chin. "I can handle picky." The walk was short, though every step felt strangely significant. Evelyn, unused to sidewalks uneven with cracks and chalk drawings, found herself watching Rosie skip along beside her father, her small hand clasped firmly in his. The child's laughter rang out like bells, echoing against the brick walls. Evelyn felt something stir deep in her chest, something she hadn't allowed in years. Envy, yes, but also yearning. She tried to remember the last time she had walked anywhere without a driver waiting at the curb. She couldn't. When they reached the modest schoolhouse, Rosie darted forward to greet a teacher, her little voice piping up with stories about soup and rabbits. Evelyn stood back, oddly nervous. Parents gathered in clusters, chatting, exchanging smiles, while she lingered at the edge like an outsider peering through glass. Leo noticed, his expression softening. "Relax," he murmured. "They don't bite." She shot him a look. "I don't. Do this." "I can tell," he said with a teasing grin. For the first time in years, Evelyn flushed. Not with anger, but something else. On the way back, Rosie tugged at her father's sleeve. "Daddy, can we show her?" Leo crouched down, brushing her curls back. "Show her what, Maushin?" Rosie pointed at Evelyn with surprising boldness. "The drawing," Leo chuckled, then sighed. "All right, but only if she promises not to laugh." Evelyn crouched awkwardly to meet the little girl's eyes. "I won't laugh, I promise." Rosie dug into her small backpack and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. On it, in bright crayon colors, were 3 stick figures. One tall with messy hair, one small with a bun on her head, and the little one in between holding both their hands. Above them, in uneven letters, Rosie had written, "Daddy plus lady plus me." Evelyn's breath caught. She stared at the drawing, her throat tightening. Rosie grinned proudly, pressing it into her hand. "That's us." Evelyn swallowed hard, blinking quickly, but the sting in her eyes refused to vanish. She folded the drawing carefully, as though it were fragile glass. "It's beautiful," she whispered. And for once, she didn't care if her voice shook. And in that moment, everything changed. Not because of money, not because of power, but because of love, served in a single bowl of soup. Thank you for sharing this story with us. If it touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss the next one. Stay warm, stay kind, and see you soon.